Hello, everyone. We're going to be starting here in about just a little over a minute. Just to remind you, if you're at the end of the session, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to do so in the chat box. And so everyone is muted right now. And so if you have anything, if you have a question before the session starts, just go ahead and shoot me a question on the chat box, and be forewarned that that goes to everyone unless you actually change it to just go to me. But we'll be starting in here in just a few minutes, or less than a minute actually. Okay, everyone, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 7 o'clock, and I want to welcome you again to another presentation in the Stay-at-Home Lecture Series sponsored by the Society for the History of Medicine and the Health Professions at UAMS, which supports the Historical Research Center at UAMS. Let me get my script up here while we're doing that. And looks like we have about 12 participants tonight. And I'm sure there'll be other people who join in. But tonight we're going to be talking about W.A. Jaquith, who worked for the Prudential Life Insurance Company. And we're going to talk a little bit about his tour of Arkansas in 1906. But before we do that, I want to talk you through the Historical Research Center, which, as I mentioned, is it's at the UAMS Library. We are the only archives in the state dedicated to collecting the history of the health sciences in Arkansas. So we take that mission very seriously, and we want to, in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we'd like to document the time that we're living in. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask every one of you, if you're out, if you see a flyer or something that says, stay 6 feet back, or wash your hands, or restaurants closed due to COVID-19. And, if you're able to, we'd love for you to pick those up and donate them to us. Also, if you're keeping a journal during this time, we'd love to have that. Later on, when historians look back on this time and they're writing a history of what went on, those journal entries and diaries and letters, emails, things like that are going to be really important in researching this time. Also, if any of you are out there are crafty and quilters, maybe think about taking those leftover fabric masks that we're going to be seeing, wash them, of course, and then maybe make us a quilt out of those. We'd love to have that. If you'd like to have any more information about what we collect at the Historical Research Center, please feel free to email me, and I'll be glad to give you a little bit of advice on that. As I mentioned, tonight's stay-at-home lecture, this series is sponsored by the Society for the History of Medicine and the Health Professions. That is the Friends group for the Historical Research Center. If you're not a member of the Society, I hope you will consider joining. The membership dues are pretty inexpensive, $15 for an individual and $5 if you're a student. And that doesn't matter if you're a student at UAMS or a student at UALR or UA Fayetteville. We'll accept your $5 for a student membership. Now, in addition to lectures like this, the society also sponsors an annual dinner and lecture, and actually presentations throughout the year, in-person presentations. On your screen is a link to the society's website. It's an awfully long URL, I realize that, but there's also, if you'd like to just go directly to our PayPal account, that is on the screen as well, paypal.me/shmhp, and you can join right from there. So I hope you'll consider doing that. A few notes for tonight. Everyone's audio is on mute, so no one will be able to hear you if you say anything, and your video is also off, so no one's going to be able to see you unless something drastic happens and they're able to see you. And one more note on tonight's lecture before we get started. You will be able to ask questions at the end of the session, at the end of the presentation. Just use the chat box, and that should be fairly easy to find. There might be at the top, you might have to go to and select chat. But if you have a question, please feel free to ask that. And just a little bit more about this series. This is the third in the series. We had one on the influenza epidemic of 1918. We had one on quack medicine, and then we had one on, I can't remember what the third one was on, but there are going to be 4 more of these presentations. It's going to happen every first and third Thursday of May, June, and July. The next one is going to be June 4th, and that is going to be given by Kaylee Henderson, who works at the Historical Research Center. She's our digital initiatives librarian. She's going to be talking about Eva Dodge, who is a OBGYN doctor at UAMS. So I hope you'll tune into that. Every first and third Thursday starts at 7 o'clock. It lasts an hour. You can eat your supper while you're watching if you'd like. So I hope you'll mark your calendars and join us for that. The link you used tonight to join this session is going to be good for all of the upcoming presentations. So feel free to bookmark that link, and hope you'll be able to join us. Now, as I mentioned earlier, let's go ahead and get into the presentation. We're going to be talking about W.A. Jaquith and his 1906 tour. That says the Arkansas Ozarks. Is actually going to be all of Arkansas. He focuses mainly on the Ozarks. He talks a lot in detail about the Ozarks, but he actually visited all of the state. And you wouldn't think, as I mentioned, he worked for the Prudential Life Insurance Company, and you wouldn't think that a report written for an insurance company would be necessarily interesting, but it's just full of local observations and candid comments, and it might be considered a little gossipy today, but it's just really a fascinating look into the health conditions and the physicians in Arkansas that practiced in 1906. So let's get started. The state of medicine in Arkansas in the early part of the 20th century was a bit chaotic and definitely uneven in the quality of care. On your screen is a picture of surgery rooms at Sparks Hospital in Fort Smith around 1906. So most towns had doctors or people who called themselves doctors, and many times those doctors, I'm going to use doctors in quotes there, they may or may not have had training. So if you lived in 1906, especially in rural Arkansas, there's no guarantee that the person you went to that you called doctor, he might not necessarily have been a doctor or had even gone to school. Because at that time, there were 3 ways that you could become a doctor prior to the early part of the 20th century. So a lot of the physicians that were practicing in 1906 got their physician's degree in one of these ways. Apprenticeship. You find a doctor, you say, I want to learn everything I can from you. And then after a certain period of time, that doctor would tell you, I think you've learned everything that I can teach you, so you can go out and be your own doctor. People became doctors that way. They went to for-profit schools. The doctors themselves owned the schools. The students purchased tickets to attend certain lectures, but they rarely saw patients. So for example, if a student was interested in anatomy, he would purchase a ticket to attend an anatomy lecture by the doctor or maybe a visiting physician from the town. Now, there are a lot of, there are two colleges listed on your screen: the College of Physicians and Surgeons of the West, founded in 1812, Castleton Medical College in Vermont, 1818. Old medical schools. Now, the third way that you could have earned your medical degree was by a university medical school. In 1830, there were 22 of those in the United States, none west of the Mississippi. In 1834, the Medical College of Louisiana was founded. So here in Arkansas, if people were in Arkansas, they could either have gone to New Orleans to get their library, or their, I keep saying library degree, their medical degree, or they could have gone up to St. Louis to get it there. But those were one of those three ways you got your medical degree. And so the people who were practicing in early 20th century Arkansas might have gotten their degree through an apprenticeship. They may have gone to a true university medical school, or they might have gone to a for-profit school. So you had varying degrees of education, and the quality of that education varied greatly as well. Now, in Arkansas, Arkansans had few options in the late 19th century to attend a university medical school. As I mentioned, there was St. Louis, there was New Orleans. There was nothing in Arkansas until 1879, when the medical department of Arkansas Industrial University, which was what the U of A was then known as, was founded. The AIU had been founded in 1871. Of course, you know that the university was located in Fayetteville. So this medical department that they created, that they established in 1879, they decided that it needed to be in Little Rock. And so that greatly improved the medical education options in the state. Obviously, you go from 0 to 1, you have you just increase your educational availability a lot. But after the medical school was established in 1879, then there's sort of this roll that Arkansas gets on. The first permanent hospital is established in Arkansas in Fort Smith in 1887. In 1888, Little Rock gets its first hospital, charity hospital, which becomes St. Vincent. And that is because a couple here in Little Rock, the Hagers, made a compact with God that if God kept the yellow fever epidemic of 1878 out of Little Rock, that they would give money to build a hospital. Yellow fever did not come to Arkansas, and so when the Hagers died in the mid-1880s, they left money with the Catholic Diocese of Little Rock to found Charity Hospital, which became St. Vincent later on. As I mentioned, Arkansas Industrial University was founded in 1871. 1879, the medical school was established. The medical department of the Arkansas Industrial University was a for-profit school. So the 8 doctors owned the school. It was not officially affiliated with the university, except in name only. It was not an official unit of the university. The University Board of Trustees just let them use their name to promote the school. So by 1903, there's traction about, well, maybe we need to make doctors a little bit more accountable and have some sort of education. So in 1903, Act 22 was passed that required statewide licensing. At that time, there were 3 boards to license physicians through an examination process. Those taking the exams were not required, though, to have a diploma from a medical college. So you didn't necessarily have to graduate from a medical college to take the exam and get a license. Later on, in 1909, the state required those taking the licensing exam to have a diploma from a recognized medical school. So it wasn't until, you know, even after, you know, 10 years after a decade after the new century had come into being, that you even had to have a graduate degree or a diploma from a medical school. So in these fits and starts, you know, slowly the medical education in Arkansas comes around. So in 1906, when Dr. Jaquith made his tour around Arkansas, the state still only had a rudimentary system in place for medical education. There were 2 schools for medical education in Arkansas by that time. Of course, you had the medical department of the University of Arkansas, but you also had the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which was a school also located in Little Rock. Both offered sort of mediocre education. In 1911, they merged to become the U of A Medical School. And so the College of Physicians and Surgeons, anyone who had gone to College of Physicians and Surgeons after or before 1911, after the 2 schools merged, those graduates of the College of Physicians and Surgeons were actually considered the of the medical school and UAMS. So in 1906, Dr. Jaquith made his tour around Arkansas. The Prudential Insurance Company, they sent him down to Arkansas. They wanted him to interview and check on the fitness of the doctors that the Prudential had contracted with to examine applicants. So he comes down to Arkansas and makes a tour all around the state. He starts up in eastern Arkansas, goes down the eastern side of Arkansas, southern Arkansas, comes through central Arkansas, northwest Arkansas, and then he just makes a complete circle and leaves the state up in the northeast part again. So the Prudential Life Insurance, we've heard of Prudential. It was founded in New Jersey in 1875 as the Widows and Orphan Friendly Society. And it originally only offered burial insurance, but moved into the life insurance market soon after its founding. It came to Arkansas in 1904, so it had not really been in the state market for very long before Dr. Jaquith arrived. The insurance company, as I mentioned, contracted with doctors around the state to perform medical exams to those purchasing life insurance policies. Much like today, you know, they wanted to weed out any pre-existing conditions that the applicants had. In early 1906, Dr. Jaquith traveled around Arkansas, gathering information on the physicians, and his report provides an interesting look on Arkansas towns and commentary on the state's physicians, as I mentioned earlier. He was very candid in his comments. And the report itself is very valuable. It's a valuable source for the state of medicine in Arkansas in the early 20th century, and it's a nice cultural and societal history for historians to utilize. I don't think it's very many people know about it, though. Its complete title is called Report on the Special Medical Conditions of Arkansas, and it was just one of a series of reports commissioned by Prudential to check on the doctors around in the states that they operated. So it wasn't just Arkansas that had a report like that. There were other states as well. Dr. Jaquith came to Arkansas in March, and he traveled around the state until mid-May. So about 2.5 months he was in Arkansas, traveling around the state, utilizing the railroads, mainly as a mode of transportation. In total, he visited 178 towns across the entire state. He was very impressed with the state as a whole, and in his report, he noted, quote, "The natural resources of Arkansas are probably more varied than will be found in any other state in the Union. The territory included in Crawford, Washington, and Benton counties is undoubtedly the garden spot." He was very complimentary of Northwest Arkansas. But as complimentary as he was as the scenic beauty of Arkansas, he was not impressed on the whole with the physicians. Throughout his tour, he met 150 physicians. At the time, there were reported about 2,300 doctors in the state. In his report, Dr. Jaquith noted that he, quote, was very much surprised to find so many incompetent physicians practicing medicine in this state, end quote. And because many of the so-called physicians, remember, never attended a true medical school. They either went through the apprenticeship or some variation. Dr. Jaquith said he did, however, quote, he had the pleasure of meeting several well-qualified physicians who resided in the larger towns. And in fact, most of the physicians in the northwestern section of the state are very competent men. Again, he was very complimentary of Northwest Arkansas, the people in Northwest Arkansas, and around the state. There were pockets of around the state that he was complimentary of, particularly individual people. But as a whole, the Northwest Arkansas part was the best in his opinion. He also, in addition to commenting on the physicians themselves, and he noted in his report that some of the physicians that the Prudential had listed as agents for the company, who were supposed to be providing medical exams for these applicants, they'd actually been dead for a long time. So they were clearing the roles as he was going along too. But he also commented on the health conditions of the state, saying that, quote, in the late summer and early autumn seasons, malaria is very prevalent. In fact, in some districts, one will meet individuals who have chills at all seasons. In the larger towns and mountainous districts, there is very little malaria. So who was Dr. Jaquith? Where did he come from? How did he end up in Arkansas? He was actually born in Ontario, Canada in 1874 and graduated from Queen's University in 1898. He went to Chicago after graduation, and he stayed in Chicago. He became professor of physical diagnosis at Postgraduate Medical College in Chicago from 1904 to 1905. In 1905, he became assistant medical director at Prudential Insurance, and he stayed in that position. So he was as the assistant medical director when he came to Arkansas in 1906. He stayed in that position until 1912, when he was promoted to the chief medical director. In 1920, he was hired by a rival insurance company, the National Life Insurance Company, and he stayed with them until 1934, when he moved to Columbus, Ohio, to work for another insurance company, the Mutual Life Insurance, where he stayed until he retired in 1945, and then he died in 1959. So he spent most of his career with the insurance companies. But let's get to his report, which is it's a really interesting look into Arkansas in 1906. As I mentioned, he came to Arkansas in Northeast Arkansas. He came down from St. Louis on the train, and his first stop was in Harrisburg in Poinsett County. His comments on the town of Harrisburg and the physicians there pretty much sets the tone for his entire report. He was not impressed with Harrisburg, and so it's kind of colored his entire view of Arkansas, in my opinion. On March 29th, 1906, he left St. Louis at 8:40 p.m. heading south, and he reached Harrisburg the next morning at 5:28 a.m. The train was 4 hours late, which was a typical comment that you heard about Arkansas trains, how they were so slow and it took forever to get anywhere. He did note in his report that, quote, the trains just crept along because of the condition of the roadbed. For many miles coming through the Arkansas lowlands, the land on either side of the railroad track is completely submerged, and it has the appearance of a lake with trees planted in it. Now, once he arrived in town, as I mentioned, he was not impressed with Harrisburg. Quote, he says, this is not a progressive town. The inhabitants are all dead and only need to be buried, end quote. So his first impression of Arkansas was not good, and it would only get slightly rosier as he went. Now, from there, from Harrisburg, he took the train to the eastern part of the state, down the eastern part of the state, and he ended up in Phillips County. And he went to Helena, And then from there, he went to Poplar Grove. And he says, the train on which I came here stopped at Poplar Grove, and I called at Dr. Pearson's office, but he was not around, so I did not meet him. If a man is in a hurry to get about Arkansas, he would make better time walking than waiting for and riding on the railroads. It is 102 miles from Helena to Pine Bluff. He goes to Pine Bluff after this. I left Helena yesterday at 7 a.m. and did not reach here until 10:30. That is the rate of less than 7 miles per hour. Even to get here at all, had to ride in the caboose of a freight train. So he was not very keen on the status of the railroad here in Arkansas. So from Phillips, from eastern Arkansas, he goes upward a little bit. He ends up in Devall's Bluff, and he says, our examiner there in Devall's Bluff is quite a character. He is 72 years of age, having graduated from Michigan University in 1857. He is president of the Pension Examining Board, and although quite active, still he appears to be in his dotage. It seems to me he has reached too advanced in age to be considered longer in our service. So, you know, again, he gets to the point where he's not really that keen on doctors in the state. So from Des Arc, he moves over to, he moves over to down to Deshay County and goes to McGee. And he was not impressed with McGee all that much as well. So he goes through there, he goes through Pine Bluff. After leaving Pine Bluff, one passes through many large plantations, which look to be fairly good, and there is also along the route a number of sawmills in operation. As you are no doubt aware, the colored population in this part of the South is very much in the majority. The train reached McGee at 1 p.m. and did not leave until 1:30. This delay gave me opportunity to call on the leading physician there. From inquiry and observation, I learned before leaving, remember he's in McGee, that because of the bad morals of the town, it would not be advisable for the Prudential to write any business here. The town of McGee sprung up a year or two ago, and I understand the majority of the buildings there are occupied by saloons, gamblers, and prostitutes. From different people, I understand the town of McGee is the worst in Arkansas. So his idea of McGee, he wasn't impressed with southern Arkansas very much at all. So in McGee, he goes from southeast Arkansas, goes over the southern part of the state. He goes through Crossett, he goes through Magnolia, ends up in Magnolia, goes through El Dorado, and he finally ends up in Texarkana. He visits Texarkana. He's actually impressed with Texarkana. Now remember, Texarkana is one of the larger cities, which is going to have, most likely, better doctors. So he goes and he visits, he ends up getting at Winthrop in Little River County. And Little River County, he says, there's only, he says there is only one other so-called physician at Winthrop, and he is, quote, no good, because being a whiskey and morphine fiend. Thus, by removing the name of Dr. Matthews from the list of examiners there, we are left without any medical service in Winthrop. Probably all of Miller County, I would imagine. But that's kind of, it's interesting to note that throughout this report, he hears these reports of people who are addicted to morphine, they're alcoholics. And of course, at that time period, addiction to morphine was fairly common. It wasn't just it wasn't just a drug for lower class people. I mean, every level of society had an addiction, had someone who was addicted to morphine, and including former Governor Augustus Hill Garland's son, who was a novelist. became addicted to morphine, and actually he overdosed on morphine and died in a hotel here in Little Rock. So the view of Arkansas is not so rosy as he makes his way across the state. So far he hasn't really met anyone that he is really impressed with, and it doesn't continue. It continues where his his view of Arkansas is not that greatest. So from Southwest Arkansas, he makes his way by train up to Hot Springs in Garland County. And of course, we all know the history of Hot Springs, the springs there drawing people from around the country, around the state to bathe in its waters, have a therapeutic effect on rheumatism, all sorts of diseases. But Dr. Jaquith was not impressed with Hot Springs at all. In his report, he says, Hot Springs is certainly a city of invalids. One sees that this is a fact even from walking along 2 streets. I think that in accepting any risks in this city, we should be furnished with a very clean personal and family record from infancy up. There certainly is a great amount of morality in this city. Only remained there 3 or 4 hours and was glad to get the first train out. So Hot Springs, you know, there would be some people who would say that the immorality in Hot Springs went far beyond 1906 and continued through the 20s and the 30s and maybe even continues today. But Dr. Jaquith certainly was able to pick out the immorality fairly quickly in Hot Springs. Now from Hot Springs, he travels into central Arkansas. He comes in through Perry County, goes through the new towns of Fush in Perry County, goes through Houston, Perryville. He ends up in Perryville, which is actually not on the railroad. The railroad comes in between Perry and Perryville. But he learns about Perryville. He says, the name of Dr. Manchie Howard should be taken from our list of examiners. He is highly educated and a good physician, but I learned from several sources he is addicted to morphine habit and goes on periodical sprees which sometimes last for 2 weeks. When intoxicated, he refuses to do any practice. He denied this when questioned, but seemed very nervous, and I noticed his pupils were pinpoint in size. Both Doctors Bowden and Reef, the other 2 physicians there, I am informed, are excessive users of alcoholic liquors. Met Dr. Reef. Consequently, there is no one there whom we should employ as examiners. So all the doctors in Perryville, he thought, were pretty much either they were alcoholics or incompetent and shouldn't even be considered as part as being employed by Prudential Life Insurance. So from Perryville, he makes his way to the northwest part of the state. And as I mentioned before, the northwest part of the state is where he makes the most glowing comments in his report. He makes it towards northwest Arkansas towards the end of April. He left Van Buren for Fayetteville, and he noted that the distance from Van Buren to Fayetteville was a distance of 58 miles, and that 58 miles was very hilly, and for 31 miles north to Chester, the railroad runs through a veritable Garden of Eden. The railroad passes over innumerable small streams, and each has a very swift current. From Chester to Woolsey, between Winslow and West Fork, the country is very rough. Now, Jaquith noted that the only physician between Van Buren and Woolsey was a Dr. Gray, probably a reference to a Dr. Charles E. Gray, who was born in 1873 and a graduate of Medical College of Topeka. And he graduated in 1901. Now, there was another doctor in Winslow who apparently was not as competent to Dr. Jaquith as Dr. Charles Jones, who had been born in 1858. as Dr. Charles Jones was not recommended as someone Jaquith should meet. He was only said he should meet Charles Gray, but not Dr. Jones. From Woolsey to Fayetteville, he continues to make remarks about the scenery. The hills are not so high, he says. Most of the land between the towns is under cultivation, and the villages of West Fork and Greenland appear to be quite progressive. So Northwest Arkansas is making a really nice, big impact on him. He arrives in Fayetteville, and he notes that the city is situated on top of a gradual slope 1,500 feet above sea level. Quote, "The landscape in all directions is the most beautiful I ever saw," end quote. Of all the towns visited in Arkansas, Dr. Jaquith was most impressed with Fayetteville. So at the time, Fayetteville had a population of about 6,000 people. The water supply and health conditions were excellent, he noted. And of the two men who were examiners for the Prudential, Dr. Jaquith found them both to be cultured gentlemen and exceptionally well-qualified physicians. And Prudential, he noted, was not making a mistake by entrusting their business in the hands of these two physicians. And that was no mistake on Jaquith's part, because the two physicians he mentioned were stalwarts of the community. Andrew S. Gregg was born in 1857, the son of the illustrious Lafayette Gregg. Andrew had graduated from the University of Arkansas in 1878 and from the St. Louis Medical College in 1881. When he died, Gregg's obituary noted that he was known as one of the most skillful physicians and surgeons in the county. In addition to being an eminent physician, Gregg served 2 terms as Fayetteville alderman and 2 terms as the city health official. He also served on the State Board of Health later, when it was formed in 1913. And he was also the U.S. pension examiner for 10 years. Now, the other physician that Jaquith mentioned was W.N. Yates. And he too was a pillar of the community. He had been born in 1851 in Cane Hill, graduated from Missouri Medical College in 1878. He practiced in Cincinnati in Washington County before moving to Fayetteville, where he helped to establish the infirmary on the university campus. Unfortunately, he died during the 1918 flu epidemic. So that shows you that the flu, did not really discriminate as to who it took. So these 2 prominent physicians in Fayetteville really made an impression on Dr. Jaquith. But it was all of Washington County and really all of Northwest Arkansas that really made the impression. On a side trip to Prairie Grove, just outside of Fayetteville, Dr. Jaquith remarked that the village was a quiet village of about 1,000 inhabitants. The health conditions were good, and he observed that there was no malaria in Prairie Grove. While there, Jaquith met the insurance examiner, Dr. J.H. Brewster. Apparently, Dr. Brewster was very well known in the area. The Fayetteville Democrat remarked in a November 1904 issue that the good doctor had been in Fayetteville just recently, bragging on the health of the town. The paper had to note that while Prairie Grove had 16 cases of the fever last summer, Fayetteville only had 3. So the Fayetteville paper had to get that little dig in. Of course, this piece of the paper was just jest, and Jaquith did not find anything funny about Brewster's professionalism. He was strictly, he was a good egg. Dr. Jaquith, when he remarked on Brewster, he noted that Brewster had the best practice in town, but though he did have this sort of slight remark on him, that after learning that Dr. Brewster had attested, he appeared to be of average ability. He was also very complimentary of Dr. William Mock. He found him also to be of highly competent, and Jaquith believed that Mock would provide excellent service to the insurance company. He had also heard good things about Dr. James Pittman in Prairie Grove, who was described as, quote, the only other competent physician in Prairie Grove, but he wasn't able to meet with him. Now, Jaquith, while he was there, noted that there were many potential insurance customers in Prairie Grove. He did not say the same for Springdale, which he visited next. In Springdale, a town of about 2,000 people, Jaquith visited with Dr. Dodson Christian, who was a graduate of Washington University. Dr. Christian was noted as a careful and competent examiner, but Jaquith noted that there were very few people in Springdale who would take insurance. So despite there being a very competent physician in the town, the people weren't likely to take any insurance policy. So he recommended that Prudential not even really put any effort into Springdale. Now from Springdale, Jaquith headed north to Benton County, where he visited Rogers, Gravett, and Gentry. In Gravett, Dr. Jaquith noted that Dr. George A. Hughes was a competent physician, and he believed that Hughes would do the work satisfactorily. Jaquith attempted to meet the only other physician in Gravett, a Dr. A.D. Nutt, but did not succeed. However, other physicians in the area told Jaquith that Dr. Nutt, who was a graduate of Vanderbilt, he was, quote, all right. In Gentry, Jaquith met Dr. James Beard, whom he believed to be qualified. This is surprising. It's surprising that he would think that Dr. Beard was qualified because Beard was a graduate of Memphis Hospital Medical College. And Dr. Jaquith did not think very highly of this institution, and the institution itself did not have a stellar reputation, as it was reported that pretty much anyone could get a medical degree from there, whether you were competent or not. Now, another physician that Dr. Jaquith came across was Dr. Clint Main. Who was a homeopathic physician. And he also said he could not be relied on as a competent examiner because some of his statements could not be relied upon. Though he didn't say what, which is kind of surprising because Jaquith was pretty blunt in his criticism. So who knows what was going on with Dr. Main. Now, Main was a graduate of Hahnemann Medical College in Philadelphia, which was a successor to the first institution in the U.S. to focus on homeopathic education. Now, from Gentry, Gravett, that area, he goes over to Siloam Springs. Siloam Springs, he loved Siloam Springs. He noted that in his report that the town was principally a health resort with a population of about 3,000 people. He was told that TB patients came to Siloam Springs for treatment, as did rheumatics. In the city, Jaquith met with Dr. Joseph T. Clegg, and he met with the doctor, whom he described as, quote, an excellent gentleman and exceptionally well-qualified physician. And Clegg was indeed an excellent gentleman. He was a native of Jefferson County in Arkansas, southeast Arkansas. He graduated from the University of Nashville Medical School, and he later served as president of the Arkansas Medical College. And that whole family, the whole Clegg family actually was pretty impressive. Dr. Clegg's son, Moses, who Dr. Jaquith did not meet with, but Dr. Clegg's son later became highly regarded in the medical field himself. He was a native of Benton County. He graduated from the University of Arkansas in 1896. He later served as superintendent of Queens Hospital in Hawaii, where he was when he died. He had previously served in the islands in the leper receiving station, and he was considered at the time one of the leading bacteriologists and the leading researcher on leprosy bacteria. He died of Bright's disease in 1918. So that whole family, the whole Clegg family was pretty impressive, and Joseph Clegg really impressed Dr. Jaquith. Now, as positive as he was about the Cleggs, he did not have anything positive to say about Dr. J.Z. Sexton in the city. Sexton was born in 1871 in Virginia, and he graduated from Georgetown University, which is it's a nice university, has a good reputation. He graduated from Vanderbilt with a medical degree in 1897. And before he arrived in Siloam Springs in 1900, he worked for a year in Indian Territory. So by all public accounts, Dr. Sexton was a highly competent physician, but apparently he had a spell of trouble. Dr. Jaquith was informed that Sexton was a reformed morphine fiend, and his professional word could not be trusted. Dr. Jaquith did meet with Dr. Sexton, and he reported that had he not been informed of the latter's problems, he would have thought the doctor to be, quote, all right. So you can see that Dr. Jaquith was relying a lot on the opinion of other doctors in the cities that he went to. And then in some cases, that was all the information he had about a doctor, especially if he didn't meet him in person. Now from there, Dr. Jaquith ended up in Bentonville. And then on his way to Bentonville, he met with Dr. C.W. Horton and Dr. Marion Duncan of Hiwassee and Centerton, respectively. Although his report on the two consisted of only a couple of sentences, it is apparent he was not impressed, since one of those sentences included the words, quote, would not set the world on fire. He noted, though, that the county seat of Benton County had a population of 3,000 people. And in Bentonville, he met with two of the examiners in town, Charles Cargill and James Lindsay, and found both of those men to be close, quote, first class. He did not further comment on it, and it's interesting because the more he travels around the state, the briefer and briefer his reports become. Now, while his reports become briefer, he did talk more and more about the Ozarks themselves, and particularly the two most northwestern counties in general. Writing from Eureka Springs after leaving Bentonville, Jaquith wrote in his report that he would repeat again, he's already said this once in his report, but he repeated again that Benton and Washington counties can certainly be termed the garden spot of Arkansas. One sees nothing but strawberry vines, raspberry bushes, and peach, pear, and apple trees all through these large counties. The farmhouses and outbuildings would indicate a prosperous condition of the owners. There is every prospect of a great fruit harvest this autumn. In my judgment, this is the best section of the state, and because of the satisfactory health conditions, a good field in which the Prudential should operate. So Northwest Arkansas, it wasn't likely to get malaria up there. Wasn't down in the Delta like the Delta with the malaria problems. The nice mountain air. So he was thinking that in addition to the beautiful scenery up in Northwest Arkansas, just the health conditions of Northwest Arkansas were far superior than they were in any part of the state. Now, like Fayetteville, Eureka Springs really appealed to Jaquith in his report. And in his report, he noted that the city was a health resort of about 5,000 inhabitants. He immediately cued in on the city's attraction for those seeking a treatment. He wrote in his report that, quote, this mountainous and rough part of the northwest section of the state attracted those seeking treatment for bladder trouble. Many nervous and rheumatic cases go there for treatment, but very few for specific disease. Now, Eureka Springs was known for its curing waters, and it had become a haven for those wanting treatment and to those offering treatment, whether legitimate or not. In 1906, Eureka Springs had the most doctors listed in the American Medical Directory, more than any other city in the Ozarks, and most likely more than any other city besides Little Rock in the state. It's interesting because while Fayetteville and Eureka Springs were similar in population, Eureka Springs had nearly twice the number of doctors than Fayetteville at 19. Jaquith met with 4 doctors in Eureka Springs. One, Charles Davis, was too elderly to be a benefit to Prudential. He noted that Davis had promoted various health ventures, including a sanatorium, and Dr. Davis also owned Lake Lucerne, also known as Crystal Lake, aka Sanitarium Lake, even though the sanitarium was never built. And Jaquith, he was not impressed with Davis, and he recommended that he be dropped from the company as an examiner. Now, Russell Floyd, who Jaquith met, he considered him, quote, a fine gentleman with a handsome and well-equipped suite of offices, end quote. The report on Floyd is interesting because this is the only part of Jaquith's report that he goes into detail, very excruciating detail, about Floyd's health problems. Now, despite these health problems, Jaquith was nothing but complimentary of the way Dr. Floyd handled his business and office affairs. Floyd apparently had come to the city, Eureka Springs, in the late 1800s as a patient. A biography of the doctor stated that he came to the city for, quote, its health-giving and restorative qualities, and speedily took his place among the most valued citizens, end quote. The biography described Floyd as a man of the most original and enlightened methods of untiring research and splendid achievement. Now, while he was complimentary of Floyd, again, you know, we sort of have this yin and yang of Dr. Jaquith. When there's a good physician in town, there's a bad physician in town. Dr. John Jordan, Jaquith was not impressed with. And one of the strikes against Jordan was that the doctor had recommended a man for insurance who had already contracted with another insurance company. And that other insurance company had deemed that Jordan, or the man, the person who had signed up for the insurance, was insane. So while this person, they had signed up this person and then deemed this person was insane and dropped him, Dr. Jordan signed the man up, and the man later committed suicide. So Dr. Jaquith was not impressed with Jordan. That was one strike against him. From Eureka Springs, he continued to head east, went through Berryville, Green Forest. He liked the towns. He called them good little towns. He went through Harrison, which he called a progressive little town. He wasn't able to meet with any of the doctors in Harrison, but he was told that Dr. Kirby in Harrison was one of the best physicians in the northern part of the state. And that's true because Dr. Kirby served as president of the Boone County Medical Association. And according to famed Arkansas historian Fay Hempstead, Dr. Kirby came, quote, to be the kindly friend and doctor of hundreds of families, and it would be difficult to make mention of anyone in the community more widely and favorably known than he, end quote. Jaquith did not go to Marshall on his way down from the state. He did talk with Dr. Kirby about the doctors, and he was very complimentary of Dr. Sam Daniel in Marshall. So he sort of ends his tour. He goes back to Fort Smith for a little bit. Then he returns to the Ozarks and goes to the rest of goes over to the eastern side of the Ozarks. And then he exits the state. So after almost nearly 2.5 months and nearly 800 miles, Dr. W.A. Jaquith ends his tour in Arkansas, but he left a report full of information and just a little bit of gossip. Thank you very much for you all being here. We're going to open it up for questions. If you have a questions, you can use the chat box. We have a few minutes left for questions if anyone does have any. And I will mention that the report, we have this report in the Historical Research Center at UAMS. It's, you know, what I gave you today was just a really small portion of it. And if you're in, it's just full of information. If you're doing genealogy research or you're doing local history research, it's really just chock full of information that can be useful in writing a town's history or anything like that. So if you're interested in seeing it, please contact us and we'll make arrangements for you to come and visit it and see it. And I'm gonna put my email in the chat box. If you have any questions after the presentation that you'd like to email me, please feel free to do so. If you have any questions about the Historical Research Center, or if you'd like more information about the Society for the History of Medicine and the Health Professions, and you need a little coaxing and joining, I'm happy to do that as well. So if there's not any questions, I'll go ahead and end this meeting for tonight. I encourage you, everyone to join us on June 4th for the presentation on Eva Dodge. And I appreciate everyone coming out tonight or signing on tonight to listen to the presentation and joining us for these stay-at-home lectures. So doesn't look like we have any questions. I appreciate you all being here, and I'm going to end the meeting, or feel free to leave yourself. So thank y'all very much. We'll see you soon. Stay safe.